Andy, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
As I mentioned earlier, a longtime listener, podcast through my commutes to work. So kind of strange and honored to be here after listening to so many guests and so many episodes over the years.
My pleasure. It's great to have you, and thank you for the support over the years. And I'm glad not necessarily me, but I'm glad the guests that we've had on the podcast have kept you company in them long drives. But as we were chatting about earlier, I'm glad those drives don't exist as much as they used to because of working from home and whatnot. But Andy, would you mind just giving us a bit of an intro to you? Like, what's your background and what you're currently doing?
Yeah, currently I'm the Senior Manager of Education and Training at USA Football, so American football's national governing body here in the States. Primarily, our work is in the youth space, and youth for us is under 14 before they go into the high school ranks, where we have our structured high school competitions. But been doing that for about 11 years. Previous to that, I was a American football coach at the collegiate level. Previous to that, I was a U.S. national team member in rugby, captain both 15s and 7s. And then previous to that, I was a college football player doing my studies, trying to become a strength and conditioning coach. So kind of the strange world of back and forth between the two sports of football and rugby. And again, started out wanting to be an S&C, was convinced along the process by my coaches that maybe I had the technical tactical aptitude and got into sport coaching. And now I'm kind of applying some of that trade as far as coach education, technical, tactical, physical development, kind of all things at that national governing body level. And then really enjoy kind of some consulting with the elite side, NFL, college, professional rugby, even just to kind of scratch the itch of HP, while the day-to-day is kind of that larger player pool of youth, high school, and that maybe more recreational space.
Bit of a boring question, but I think it's interesting for me. Where does USA football sit in relation to the NFL and college?
Yeah, so we're an independent group. So I guess it would be similar to the way some countries have independent professional leagues, outside of the RFU or outside of whatever that home governing body is. So the NFL is its own entity. NCAA Sports, which is our college governing body, is its own entity. And then we actually have the NFHS, which is our National High School Federation, which is its own entity. Now, those entities we work with, we consult with, we, look at group projects, or they, targeted projects for particular areas of the population, kind of depending on age and performance level. But technically, we sit as 4 independent bodies with really very specific goals. So as I mentioned, like, our target market is that under 14 youth playing the game. Once they get into the high school space, if they continue to play football, they'll be more under the governance of the National Federation. Once they go to the college, they're under the NCAA, and then they go to professional, it's the NFL. So it's just kind of the way our structure is set up. We have these 4 bodies. We all attend each other's meetings. We all do all that fun stuff, but we do operate independently.
So someone could come through the ranks from 10, 11, whatever, up to the pros and not actually come into contact with you guys? Because they wouldn't have to, because it's different. Okay, nice.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to be with us or be like kind of registered with us or anything like that, though. As they go, the decision makers just slightly change as to who's overseeing them. So again, to be a collegiate or to be an NFL coach, this is always interesting. There's no coaching certification requirements. So those coaches would never have to come through us as the recognized governing body to kind of meet their credentialing or meet their education. At least in my experience with soccer and rugby and overseas, people are always kind of taken aback a little bit like that. But the only qualification to be an NFL or a collegiate coach is to honestly probably have past success and have somebody judge you good enough for the job because of how you did at your last place. There's no formal requirements. So in the high school space and the youth space, there are coaching certification requirements to make sure you are capable and certified to oversee youth, because we'd be under 18 at that point and considered juvenile. But once we get into that adult pro space and collegiate with NIL, we'll call it pro now, you can kind of just be good, or somebody judge you to be good, and you can get a paycheck.
Interesting. So what's your influence? What influence have you taken from your rugby days into the American football side and I suppose the education training stuff that you do now?
Yeah, well, I mean, so long story is, so my father was a longtime rugby coach here in the States at the collegiate level. 10-year, 11-year head coaching career. Went to multiple Final Fours, I guess semifinals for most of the world, but we love the Final Four moniker here in the States. Never won a national championship. I think went to 3 national championship games, but lost every time. So great dinner table talk. Love to poke him about that one. And so I grew up with the game. I was always around the game. And then collegiately I played, and then, like I said, spent some time with the U.S. national team, and it just exposed me to really a different style of coaching. Football being such a structured martial sport, really because of the huddle and the stop in between plays, where you have an opportunity for a coach to tell you what to do and call a play and do those things. You have this very regimented structure of coaching. And then you get into a free flow sport like rugby, which may be more similar to basketball or hockey or soccer here. But, you get that kind of player-centered decision-making, process-focused coaching. And so that was huge for me because it really opened up some doors to other ways of coaching, other ways of doing things. And then obviously you get into the technical side. Football's rugby's rugby. They're very different games tactically, and therefore not all of the techniques carry over. The idea of, in one sport, you're by law allowed a free line to the ball carrier. And football, the NFL level, they pay guys $20 million a year to block you and not let you get to the ball carrier. So there's some interesting little differences there, but there certainly are things that do cross over. And by being able to meet with great coaches, being able to be experienced to that, getting into that community, and then continuing that through like kind of the rest of my life and my career, you get to talk to those guys, you get to pick their brains, and you get to, if you have a good enough lens to filter it through, there's amazing things you can pick up and you can take from it. So whether it's a little bit of a technique thing, obviously been highly influenced by like kind of the grapple based training, which was just an everyday part of our warm up in rugby. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and you're like, why don't any football people do this? Like, they lift weights and they work on their skills, but there's none of this kind of special strength, SPE style of training that's involved. It's really polarized, and maybe that can be a thing. In 2015, I guess it was, the Seattle Seahawks put out a YouTube video. You can still find it floating around, but on there, how rugby inspired their tackling technique. And when that video came out, I've said this over and over again, through no kind of special skill, just through luck of my experience, people were like, if only there was an American football coach that also played a high level of rugby and could help us like translate some of this stuff, or could talk back and forth about some of the differences, or maybe even introduce me to a high-level professional rugby coach whose brain I could pick. And suddenly there I was, and I became really useful in the football community because I had these connections and these people and could talk some of that technique and help translate. And so that really kind of started, I guess, my spot as maybe a skills consultant and kind of a technical analyst in that space, because like I said, I just had been lucky enough to have that experience of like, I had played that sport at the highest level. I have had my caps, and I was currently coaching American football. So we just kind of built from there and continued to go forward, and met some great people since, and then have been able to kind of create some packages and programs that I guess people like and help them out. So we keep doing it.
So on the tackle side of things, because I think this is something that I from me, who's got more of a head in rugby than American football, but that's by the by. What can you guys in American football, and you, because you, as was in a rugby background, translate from the rugby side to the American football side, and what does that framework look like? I suppose from a youth level as well, and then progressing that on into pros. What can you take, and what's that framework look like?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing and the easiest thing was simply the that rugby was teaching various tackles at the time. When I was playing, it was very common for us to talk about choke versus chop and, what are the right situations and when is this appropriate. And in my football playing experience up to that point, I had only ever been taught one tackle. And some of those tackles differed coaching staff to coaching staff or team to team on what they wanted, but there was a tackle type. And I think if you would talk to most football coaches, probably the biggest thing that has changed since that 2015 is a realization that different situations may require different tackle types. And if our players are going to make these different tackle types, it's probably best that we're training these various different tackle types instead of having a tackle. Obviously, I know with the tackle laws and community rugby coming down, it's a little bit different. But obviously, at the upper levels, we're still looking at, when is choke, when is chop, or I guess you call it whatever you want, different terminology. But when are those the right things? What are the different kind of finishes that you may have? What does a second man in do? And so some of those things became really interesting conversation points around the tackle in American football. And then the big thing from the health and safety standpoint, which was really kind of a revolution for a lot of people of my age, was head placement. Where if you look at American football, there was a time where the head was always placed in the side of the tackle. It would look very much similar to what we would now call a, quote, rugby tackle. I believe kind of as helmet technology improved going through the years, where you put your helmet became actively taught different. I was taught in my football career by very well-meaning, high-quality coaches to tackle with my face. And the idea was if you tackle with your nose, your head will be up and you'll protect your neck. And conveniently, you have this giant plastic shell on your head. So you're not gonna, get a bloody nose and bust your eye and your lip and that kind of thing. So I was actively taught tackle with your nose, and for the sole purpose of neck safety. And to 17, 18, 19-year-old Andy Ryland, that made a lot of sense. It wasn't until afterwards that, some things came out in the news and the media that people started saying, hey, maybe we're missing something here, and trying to actively reduce head and helmet impacts became a big deal. And so getting your head to the side and more shoulder striking became a hot priority. Now, the other side of it was if we're looking at an angle or a side-on tackle, during that same kind of time period, we'll say, of helmet increase, putting your head in front of the ball carrier was the technique of choice in American football. I have this giant plastic shell on. I'm not quite as worried about, getting kneed or something like that because this thing is going to protect me. So the head was always placed in front of the ball carrier. Again, when the same kind of revolution and information outpouring happened, people started to say, maybe that's not the best idea. And maybe putting your head behind the carrier, the way the guys without helmets do, should be our preferred method. So those were kind of the big revolutions and kind of the big things that got taken from kind of rugby and have really grown, we'll say, over that last kind of 10 years. And then to your point on the youth, as these techniques at the upper levels changed, as information changed, there becomes an instant filter down effect. And so the first thing you would hear from the elite level coaches is trying to change some of these embedded techniques in my players is really difficult. They've been doing it for 20 or 25 years this way. What we really have to do is get the next generation of players brought up in a system in which head behind the ball carrier, shoulder strike, head to the side is the only way they've ever known. And that becomes really a part of who they are within the sport. And that technique becomes highly stabilized. And, as a player moves from team to team and coach to coach, they're all speaking the same language. And they're not going from strike with your face to tackle with your shoulder to back to strike with your face or put your head in front, that there's really this unified language starting from their very entry-level experience, that they're practicing those techniques, which are going to, again, prioritize the shoulder, de-emphasize the helmet, and truly talk openly about putting the head and helmet in a safe place. There was a time where when this first came out, like I said, back in that 2015 era, it would be very common for coaches to say, we don't even talk about the head. We talk about the shoulder, we talk about where we want to put the shoulder, we talk about making good shoulder contact, but we don't want to talk about the head. And maybe it was fear of some of the things that were in the news about injuries and those kind of things. And I always felt that was a massive oversight. Like, if you're not actively telling players where to safely put their head, we're kind of missing a trick there. And so that became some of the things that got filtered down, that we need to actively teach and reinforce and drive this behavior change through our technical models and our technical teachings.
So what impact, no pun intended, what impact are we seeing since that time on head and neck injuries, concussions? Is that starting to filter through to a point where data has been collected on these kind of things? And what impact are you seeing anecdotally?
So the problem is obviously that the technical change isn't the only measure that's gone into place. So, you're also talking about the limiting of live contact in training sessions, similar to what World Rugby did with the contact minutes and contact intensities. But, you're limited in the number of contacts or the amount of live contacts you're allowed in training. The limiting of what equipment is allowed to be worn, or how many full padded live sessions per day you can have. During preseason camp, they limited the amount of two-a-days and that were allowed to be had. So now you're going to one practice a day. So you're limiting total exposure rates. I'm sure kind of it made big news, but the NFL did their studies the last couple of years with the Guardian caps, which was the extra padding that went over top of the helmet shell for high collision players. So we've seen decreases in numbers of concussions that have occurred during training. The problem is when you have this multivariate problem where I can point to here's 4 big changes. We changed technique. We changed number of practices. We changed the amount of contact in practice. We've also added this potential unique force reducing padding. Which one of those is responsible for the largest chunk of that decrease? I don't have the answer, but I know that cumulatively, we are seeing decreases, most specifically in training and in practice. Like all sports, the game is the game, and crazy things happen. And, people may do some things in some unique situations to try to win a game that we wouldn't say are the best technically, but those things happen. So the numbers are trending in the right direction. And I do think that the technical modeling has a large part to do with it. The coach's reinforcement of that has a large part, but statistically, we just can't kind of say, we've decreased it by X because of Y.
So if there's a coach out there who wants to implement some really structured tackle training that's potentially not doing it right now, or it's informal, what would be the best place to start for you to advise them to implement these with the frameworks or the technical model?
Yeah, so at USA Football, as part of our coach certification, the tackle and the block is included in that. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, our level 1 coaching certification is truly a health and safety certification. It's not, nuts and bolts kind of how to coach the sport or tactical models. Blocking and tackling is included in our safety certification, obviously, because there is a safety component of those skills that rises above the other ones. Very similarly, it would be like the, ruck, scrum, tackle in rugby, where you go, okay, these skill areas have the most health and safety impact. So we want to make sure we're giving them a base on that. So that is included in our certification. But we've also kind of have this belief at USA Football that you shouldn't have to pay money or take a certification to keep your kids safe. So we have free resources on our entry levels within the tackle model. We call it our shoulder tackle system, but it's like a 22 drill program that outlines the basics of what the techniques are, what are some of the fundamentals and foundational movements, and then, what would be the 3 most common tackle types, and give some drill series for each of the 3 tackle types. And for us, that's going to be the classic kind of upper body tackle, which again, we could use rugby terminology and talk about like a choke, choke style tackle. That's going to be our form tackle. We have a thigh and drive tackle, which is going to be our lower body tackle with kind of, run your feet leg drive finish. And then the thigh and roll tackle where, we snatch the legs. We're not in position to leg drive. So we're going to roll out of it, take the base away and drop the player. So it's really that introductory level about leverage, head placement, body position, and then where are the three most common errors you'll see. We do have advanced materials that are paid services. Those were actually created in conjunction with Richie Gray. So Scotsman, rugby guy, well known for his work in rugby, I believe actually wrote the tackle ready curriculum for World Rugby as well. So it's kind of interesting now that our tackle curriculums for both USA Football and World Rugby were written kind of by the same two people, if you will, and going back and forth to kind of standardize some of the true best practices.
You've taken me right back to my school days with them three tackle types. I'm picturing a northern English cold winter, shorts and t-shirt because you're not allowed to wear trousers, going through these tackle techniques, get down on the floor where it's absolutely rock hard. Took me right back, Andy, right back.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, we're trying to do the same thing. Obviously, we luck out that American football is starts off in the summer, so you get to learn in the warm months. It's not till the end of the season where you're miserable and cold and rolling around on the rock hards, hoping that the field will take a stud and the game's going to be allowed to go. So I guess that's one good thing about starting when we do. Like I said, your entry-level teaching days are fun in nice weather.
So when it comes to prepping the body for this kind of contact or contact across the board, what's your guidance? What's your anecdotal thoughts? What's your opinion on this kind of training to prep the body for the things that we just talked about?
Yeah, so at the two kind of distinctions, I would say one at the upper level, when we're talking those more elite players, again, my experience playing with the U.S. national team, playing Division I in Ireland, going to the Iran's Academy down in New Zealand, kind of being exposed to some of these things, like just that basic grapple, tumble, crawling, body position style warm-up was something we did every day. And I started to think back, like, why didn't we do this in football? Like, your basic dynamic warm-up is very locomotion based. And then we'd be like, all right, now go run into each other as hard as you can. And be like, whoa, wait a second. Like, you know what I really miss? I really miss like some of that pummeling and some of that grappling and some of those, shoulder battle, push pull games that kind of made me feel like I was ready for that competitive contact before we got into that session. And even if you were using shields and pads and things, like I felt better having done that and getting ready for that style of training. So that's the first thing that I brought over with teams and people I was working with. The second thing, and this is maybe very specific to American football, is our NCAA rules at the collegiate level and the NFL Players Association rules that they've inserted with the NFL create really long training breaks in which, quote, football activities are not allowed to be done. So there's some really long strength and conditioning blocks within the training calendar. So for the collegiate level, you have a winter training block and a summer training block. And those can be anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. So if you think you have an 8-week block in the winter and then a 12-week block in the summer, where technically you're not supposed to do football activities, you're just lifting weights and running. Well, then you go back to the sport and you're going, holy mackerel, like, why does my body feel so miserable? This is a brand new stimulus I'm not ready for. So we kind of found that if we're introducing some of that competitive grappling-based things, that body-to-body contact, that push-pull, that strain, we could keep some of those skills sharp. And you're never going to mimic, right, a practice collision, but you could at least bridge the gap. You could make going from lifting weights to running into someone feel a lot less different by this, we call it prep for contact, and this grappling based training. And that worked really well to kind of keep the guys sharp, keep the guys fresh, and also contributed to some skill learning. Again, imagine taking 12 weeks off of the season where by rule you're not allowed to tackle, and then you go back into training camp, and normally within 5 or 6 days like you're back into tackling after you've kind of gone through your acclimatization period. And so we wanted to continue to build on those skills, not only because they're important for winning games, but also, again, there's a huge health and safety aspect. Technical accuracy has a massive safety component within the tackle space. If I'm out of time, those milliseconds, if I'm not judging space and speed correctly, if I don't nail my body positions, if I'm a little bit slow, if I'm upright, if my head and shoulder isn't quite where I want it, we know the risks that you're putting yourself under. So we try to bridge that gap. The NFL, the break can even be longer. We have NFL athletes that'll tell you that they don't tackle for upwards of 20 weeks in a solid straight block. Where the season ends, there's very strict rules on how much contact can be in the OTAs in the off season. And if you're a better player, you may not be, they may not be risking a lot of contact work in any of the off season or even in the early preseason. So guys will say, like, I haven't competitively tackled in 20 weeks. Well, okay, that's going to be detrimental to skill development. Not even skill development. You're probably going to just get rusty and there's going to be some skill degradation. Well, how do we try to bridge that gap? So these prep for contact activities became really useful there. When we go down to the youth levels, what we found kind of working with the American Development Model, which is the U.S. Olympic Committee's version of an LTAD program, is that, kids today have much less free play activity exposure. And with that lack of free play and, let's be honest, our more litigious society, there's a real lack of rough and tumble play. People of our age, you probably think about the games we played at recess or at the school parks and on the school grounds. And there's no way that, today after lunch at your recess, they would let you play those kind of full contact, football, rugby style games that we did because of, fear of injury and that, like I said, that litigiousness. So the kids aren't exposed to that contact. And I'm not going to say I made it up or anything, but I started saying this at clinics and people really took to it. But organized sport for a lot of our youngsters is the first time they're ever actively even allowed in someone else's personal space. It's like, your bubble, hands to yourself, all those things. And now you got guys like me and you telling you to do this aggressively and smash them to the ground and roll and fall. And you know what I mean? Like, don't brace your fall, go down and then place the ball and, all these things. And they're like, whoa, people are breathing on me. They're sweating on me. There's grunts and impact. And I'm not sure I like this whole thing. So how do we fill in those free play, rough and tumble gaps? And so a lot of this grappling, crawling, tumbling, prep for contact activity exposes athletes to a very baseline of impact, going to ground safely, dissipating forces, dealing with dynamic balance in push-pull kind of competitive fighting situations. And then that can quickly be built into collision. So we talk about collision and contact being different. I can start two players pre-engaged in contact with each other and allow them to strain and push and pull and fight and grapple. And when you get used to that scenario, then backing it up to a foot, backing it up to a yard, backing it up to closing the space and into contact becomes a much more streamlined progression than kind of starting out, again, with this speed, force, impact scenario. And a lot of our coaches, a lot of the people, say that they've really found benefit in youngsters, both in a physical development standpoint, like I said, dynamic balance, core strength, dealing with these outside forces, but maybe just as importantly is the psychological aspect of just being comfortable within these kind of competitive, strain, friction-based environments.
I don't know if you've thought about this before. I'm sure you have. But as a footballer, not a rugby player or an American football player, I would have benefited massively from some of the stuff that you're talking about. Just the physical contact, the just been in someone's personal space. I mean, I was a defender, so I should have been comfortable with that, but I was never super comfortable with that. And looking back, there was never any games, practices, drills that put me in those positions to make me feel more comfortable with that contact, which is wild. And I'm just thinking of football here. There's 10, 20 other sports in a similar situation. I mean, this was
So it's interesting
15,
you
20
say
years
that.
ago. But
one of the most notable feedbacks I get personally is from women's football S&Cs.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Saying that, like, in our off season, we set up these games where it's, you're in a shielding situation, you're trying to protect the ball, and they'll just put a cone down. And, you put an attacker or a defender, on my butt, and I'm kind of trying to box you out and shield you from the ball, like you would see on a soccer field for me, but a football field for you. And I'm going to hold you, and you're going to try to get to the cone, and you're working kind of around the circle and trying to get that. Or we're going to put the two of you hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder on a line, and you're going to try to push them over the line laterally, back and forth, that very classic hip battle that you see in a football match. And they do these activities with the young girls, so they learn how to push, how to hold space, how to kind of create space, shield the ball. And psychologically, and again, I know this sounds stereotypical, but I swear it to be true, that one of the number one feedbacks I get is from, again, the female football coach saying, our girls are so much more comfortable with this now. And on the field, they're much more aggressive, because to step in, to use my hip and my butt or whatever, and knock you off your line and create the space and win the ball, they just were never exposed to that. They saw it on TV. Their coach was yelling at them to do it, but there was never a progression and a build up to it. And they've had a lot of success with that. So whether that's, ice hockey, obviously huge here in the States, and dry land training for ice hockey, whether it's basketball players, working in rebounds and position down low, or whether it's soccer players, the principles remain the same. Obviously, as the terminology I use is what weapons you're allowed to use, because that sounds cool to my football and rugby coaches. But, whether I'm allowed to use my hands and arms and grab you, or whether I have to use my hip and my shoulder and kind of politely, sneakily bump you so I don't get a penalty, we're using different body parts. But the idea of creating space, holding posture, holding my ground are really the same. So a little bit of creativity, a little sport evaluation, these drills can easily be changed to meet those situations. And then you start to see the patterns of, like, in basketball, if a player is cutting through the paint area trying to get open, and we're trying to disrupt that cut, and we're going to bump and push, and you're going to lean into me and you're trying to get to your spot, well, that looks an awful lot like a player making a run through the box or a set piece in soccer. And so you start to see these big carryovers. I'm shielding the ball in football, and all of a sudden it looks very much like a puck battle in the corner of an ice hockey rink. Obviously, sans the fact that I'm on ice skates, but in my dry land training, that works great. Or, like, here in the States, checking doesn't start until 14 years of age in ice hockey. But that means our 12-year-olds are doing these push-pull battles off the ice in preparation for when the skill comes into the game, so that, again, they're not going from 0 to 100. They have some baseline of, oh yeah, I'm going to push and fight and hold my space, and there's this friction, and he's going to try to move around me, and I have to feel him and then react to my movement based on feel. And that's one other area that I double down on, that I think is one of the most developmentally rich areas inside of contact. In most sports, your information is based on feel. It's, that kind of proprioception. It's, I'm leaning on you, I'm pushing, you're feeling, am I trying to get around your right shoulder or your left shoulder? But, like I said, you're behind me, and I'm using my butt and my hips to hold you out of that space. I'm not looking at you. It's not like that one-on-one defensive, watch his belly button situation. I got to feel where you're moving, where you're pushing, how you're trying to manipulate me. Well, how do you develop a good database of reacting to that feel? Well, it has to be exposure. I have to be in that situation enough that I know what you're trying to do to me and where I need to put my leg to brace, or how I need to move to stay in front of you. So developing that aspect of feel within contact situations, I think, is the same for all sports. I'd say, obviously, depending on what sport you play, it's going to happen more or less often. If I'm a type 5 rugby forward, I'm probably going to live in it. If I'm a soccer player, it happens, X amount of times per game. But normally it's key times, right? Like, if I don't win that free ball, or if I get bumped off my line, you now can make a successful header, or, so it's like, I need to be able to knock you off that line and do it effectively. So timing, the amount it happens differs, the tools I can use differ, but it's there in every sport. And so especially going back to that ADM LTAD model, I think it needs to be included in players' basic developmental sequencing, and then we'll just turn the volume up or down as far as what they need based on the sport they ultimately choose.
I'm just thinking of like handoffs in American football and rugby come to mind. I'd grown up a little bit before I understood and probably executed a solid, and this is in football, so not in the face, but in the chest or shoulder, like a successful handoff. And I was like, geez, where did that come from? Like at 16, 17, it just wouldn't have been in my repertoire. But then you're like, oh, wow, if I'd have been able to do that and just been comfortable to use your upper body in football, and that just, I suppose I'm just reinforcing what you've just said in all this, what you're saying is transferable to so many different sports and kids like, go on, mate.
So I'm sorry. I said, I have a great friend who's a football S&C here in the States. And like during their speed work, and not just doing like side to side races, he'll have players do side to side races where they're doing the hand fighting, trying to get in front. You do that little hook, you do the little hand, get grab. So he's got to have guys doing max speed sprints, like under what would be considered our, like operational environment, where they're hand fighting while they're doing their 20-meter sprint. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Like, because guess what? Max speed training has its benefits. We all love it. But also, like, can I run and fight with you? Like you said, I'm just trying to get that shoulder just in front to win the ball. And I'm doing that little hook with my hand. I'm pulling your arm back. I'm grabbing your shoulder, that little handoff to create space. Like, those are the little things that, as a elite athlete, like, those win games, those win space, that wins you the ball. But nobody really talks about it. It just kind of happens. Well, why don't we create an environment where that can happen, and it's like afforded and it's encouraged? And so now, shoot, like you said, how many times on a breakout were you in that run and you weren't just running, you were like running and hand fighting the whole time? Let's train it. Let's make it part of who you are. It's such good stuff.
I was always, the tag for me was, you've been too nice. You're always too nice. But I probably was, to be fair, but I hadn't been exposed and put in these situations to develop that confidence to be a little bit nastier and a bit more comfortable in using your arms, using your hips, using your ass to get in and, manipulating the space. And like you say, just getting that little inch of space can be the difference between scoring a try and not scoring a try, scoring a goal or not scoring a goal. So yeah, super interesting.
Comfort equals confidence. And, the age-old thing is, the question we want our players to be able to answer is, have I been there before? And so, like, we don't want game day to be the time you've been like, whoa, what is this? And so if we can make a situation where they've been there before, those moments become highly processable and way more easier to manage. And then the same thing, whether it's American football or soccer football, coaches are always yelling, be more aggressive, get in there. And it's like, well, I hate to break it to you, that's not a magic coaching cue. No player ever heard a coach yell, be more aggressive from the sideline, and suddenly turned into just like a pit bull and a wolf out there. It's like, well, how do I stress inoculate you? How do I build this up? And so I start with these pre-engaged games. We build to little bumps and things. We build it into a one-on-one, a two-on-two, just the same way we would do with all of our skill training. We build it up in this stress inoculation phase, and now you're happy, you're comfortable, and now you find yourself being more aggressive, precisely because almost that psychological block has been removed. You know what's coming, you're comfortable in the environment, you know the hit, the bump is there, and you can manage it, and if you lose the bump, you have tools to be able to fight back in. Fantastic. Guess what? That player is going to appear much more aggressive, and I think it's because they have tools and they have like a psychological comfort with what's going on.
So when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, more American football and rugby orientated, although I would have benefited from that as a football player, soccer player, What do them sessions look like? Can you give us some examples of how people may start implementing some of that stuff or taking it on another level based on what you've seen and your experience?
Yeah. So we bucket our training kind of into 4 categories, and they're not revolutionary. And really what they do is just help coaches program. So we'll start off with basics, how to fall for the really low level kid, really entry level kids. But it's going to be crawling, tumbling, carries, and then grapples. And we say grapples because obviously, like I said, wrestling is huge here in the States, but in other countries, it may be judo, it may be Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Choose your grappling art. I don't care, but those ideas of those battles. So first, we're gonna crawl and we're gonna tumble. Again, give athletes the tools to go to ground successfully, so they're confident in that. And that, again, sometimes you may go for the 50-50 ball, because if you lose the collision, you know how to fall and roll, and you're totally comfortable there. Football and rugby, the play doesn't end until people are on the ground, so you better get used to that at some point. I like carries a lot just for posture, for strength. It's great entry level kind of strength training programs. So, kind of love just various carries, and the kids enjoy them. So it's a great way to implement some kind of body to body contact, some squeezing, some carrying, some straining, and some bracing. And then we get into grapples. But grapples don't have to be kind of these hand-based, judo, jiu-jitsu, freestyle, folk style wrestling. Like I said, it could be hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder. I say like any kind of push-pull game in which you're trying to either win or hold space works. And then simply choose your sport and decide which kind of engagements you're going to use. Hey, you're allowed to grab them. You can use your hands. Okay, that's engagement 1. Hey, soccer players or basketball players, you're only allowed to use your, hips, shoulders, and, that little bit of kind of arm fighting hooks and handoffs. Perfect. We have some constraints. We can set the drills, but we're going to win space or we're going to hold space. And if you use kind of those big kind of models, you can really create about anything. I like to do, like I said, a session, and it may be just like a 10-minute block of the training session. So, hey, we're going to do our dynamic warm up, and then we're going to do a 10-minute crawl and carry block of, we're going to go, 10 meters down, 10 meters back with various crawls and various carries. We may start something like 2 sets of 8. And you're just going to go down and back with your partner. Perfect. Now we're super warmed up. Our nervous system is excited. We're feeling good. Now we're going to go jump, throw, and lift some weights. Awesome. You did it for the day. The general progression for me is going to be crawls and carries into player-to-player grapples. So you kind of earn the right to do the fun stuff. Show me you can be strong and hold your posture. Show me if you fall down, you're going to be okay and you can tumble. All right, now you guys or gals can go have at it and push and pull and fight and battle a little bit. So like I said, crawls, carries into partner pushes. With older athletes, I do actually love extended time, almost like aerobic conditioning, kind of Joel Jamieson roadwork 2.0 stuff, up 15, 30 seconds of work, pushing back and forth, grappling, pummeling, all that kind of stuff. The younger athletes who don't know how to control their intensity very well, it tends to become more aggressive and really kind of going at it. So maybe it fits better kind of in like that anaerobic kind of explosive work where it's, 6 to 10 seconds of, trying to win the line or trying to get to the cone in those kind of box out shielding style drills. And then within that model, you can just program your time domains. I like on the minute, every minute for group sessions, just because it makes it really easy to coach, right? So it's like, we're going to have, a 10 second battle and then a 50-second rest. And it's like group 1 goes on the 0, group 2 goes on the 30-second, and you can just flip back and forth. And you can easily have, 40, 50 athletes doing this on a field really quickly. And again, like I said, I use that on the minute block just because it makes it easy. And then it's like, all right, aerobic day, 70% intensity, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And that way you have some structure to it. And it just boom, boom, boom. Your 10-minute block is done. Everyone's got some work in. Go on to the rest of your session. And then for our contact collision sports, rugby and football specifically, I love it as what I would call a specialized warm-up. So again, after our generic kind of dynamic movement-based warm-up, we're going to do 3 to 4 kind of grapple, crawl, carry activities, kind of get the body primed. And then we'll go into our technical collision work, whether that's block, tackle, ruck, so be it. So you can kind of microdose it there. Also, great for like finishers, challenge kind of a thing. Hey, we finished our conditioning. Now we're going to have a little fun. We're going to do a little competition. So you could throw it at the end of a workout like that. Hey, great lift, guys. Now we're going to have a little fun. We're going to do this little, I don't know, bear crawl grapple game or whatever it might be. So it could be beginning as part of the warm up. It could be the end as kind of a finisher, challenge, competition, fun kind of thing. There are lots of ways to do it. And then with your advanced athletes, we do it a lot for conditioning, especially position specific. A tight 5 forward or a lineman in American football, those guys run a lot less than some of the other guys. So it's like, hey, you know what we're going to do one day a week? Like, we're going to have a strongman grapple based, fighting based conditioning. And so we're going to get some of that non-running physical work that is really kind of how you make your living. Like you make your living battling other giant humans. So you know how we're going to prepare you? We're going to spend some time each week battling other giant humans. And like I said, anyone who's done it, knows that grappling can be absolutely exhausting. It's almost a different kind of muscular fitness. And so in addition to all of the running we're going to need for our sports, don't get me wrong, like you got to cover your mileage, but you may want to program some of that in so that they're ready for that. And they're, like I said, whether it's the 70th minute or whether it's the fourth quarter, they're up for the physical battle that's going to come. So it just takes so many different ways. Like I said, it could be part of a youth development program. It could be warm up. It could be a finisher. It could be a dedicated session, or it could just be a 10-minute block, before you go hit your bench presses. As long as you kind of go by the general things, earn the right crawls and carries before battles. And then, like I said, keeping an eye on intensity for aerobic versus anaerobic and how much volume you want. A good strength and conditioning coach with any sort of kind of background and understanding of those principles will easily be able to put together a really great session.
Perfect. Well, we're coming up to the hour that I promised you I'd keep you for, but we can't discuss this without throwing in neck training as well. So where does this fit in? How does it fit in with the tackle stuff, youth athletes, older athletes, and what are your thoughts on when they should be introduced? How we had Gavin Pratt from the UFC who did an amazing job of taking us through the UFC neck matrix. But I'd love to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so I think the research at this point is pretty clear on increases in neck strength and decreases in some of the outcomes of some of those like concussion-related injuries. So I think we all feel good about that. I think it should be included in everyone's training. Again, depending on the sport, maybe how much as far as a volume standpoint. Rugby football athletes are gonna do it all the time. For a soccer player, it's probably going to be much less. But ultimately, at some point, like if you're going to head the ball a lot, you want to make sure you have that. I'm a big believer in obviously like the easy strength, but our basic eccentric, concentric, traditional exercises, both flexion, extension, and then the lateral flexion exercises are great. I think that's kind of the low-hanging fruit because it's really simple. I'm also a huge believer in the isometrics as well. So, something as simple as a band, and anywhere you can hook a band gives you the ability to do your isometrics within your programming. Again, extension, flexion, lateral flexion. I do like with the bands, I think it's easier to work on the rotational isometrics. And then I'm a huge fan of William Whalen, a guy out there in the UK, his quasi isometric series. So he may have a band that's pulling laterally, and then you're going to do flexion, extension, front to back nods. Or you have a band pulling from the back to front. So you're kind of in this extension isometric, and then you're going to do your lateral flexion. So you're working through these ranges of motions while the band is pulling you in the opposite direction. I love that quasi-isometric series. That's one of my absolute favorites, because I like the idea of bracing one direction while having dynamic movements, because that's really what happens in sports. So I think if you look at kind of those three buckets, your traditional exercises, your isometrics, and then your quasi-isometrics, you have a great pool of exercises to be able to program it. I mean, even to this day, I know it doesn't look like it, since I don't ruck and tackle anymore, and I don't wear a helmet, which, by the way, just wearing a helmet tends to build pretty good neck strength, because you have this giant thing on your head at all times. But I still train my neck even to this day. One day a week I do flexion extension, and then one day a week I do lateral flexion to both sides, and then one day a week I do the William Whalen quasi-isometric series. And that's my 3 days of the week. Now it's like part of my warm-up. It's not obviously like, a meat and potatoes of like when I was playing American football and rugby. We'd have what we call our armor building, kind of. So at the end of a session, you're going to do your upright rows, your shrugs, your lateral raises, neck, your traps, shoulder kind of meat that's going to protect you. And neck was always part of that armor building, and it was maybe more of a focus. But now it's included in my warm-up sessions, where it's like, I'm doing all my band work and my overhead dislocations and my band pull aparts and my rotator cuff, and I throw in a little bit of neck work, and that's part of my warm-up. I think it's that important that I still do it to this day. So I don't know if that's a scientific answer, but it's certainly rooted deep within me on how strong I believe in it.
Love that, Andy. Right. I've definitely kept you a little bit longer than I said I would. So I really appreciate you coming on early doors and having a chat with us and going through some of this stuff, because it's something I've wanted to chat about with you for a while. So I really appreciate it.
Well, like I said, I hope my boss doesn't hear this, but I'd much rather be doing this and doing real work. So anytime, this is the good stuff.
Good man. No, thank you very much. If anyone wants to jump in and follow you on Instagram, Twitter, any social media, or get to know a little bit more about you and your work, where's the best place?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I'm ADR Coach Development. So ADR, my initials, Coach Development. I believe it's Coach Dev on Twitter. And then at USA Football, because I work for them, most of my writings, most of my articles are on usafootball.com. Admittedly, I don't have a great place where they're like kind of consolidated in one place, but you can find them on there. So a lot of stuff on the development of youth athletes, and then some drill development, tackle technique stuff. That's where my writings are. And again, available on email. Again, like I said, this is what I get to do for a living, is try to help develop young athletes and help work with older kind of elite athletes. So always keen to take an email, answer some questions, and try to help someone out in this space. If my experience can be useful, fantastic. Like I said, I lucked into it because of my experiences, maybe not my talent. And so at least I can do is pass it on.
Beautiful. Right. Andy, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Look forward to keeping in touch and see what develops further down the line.
Yes, sir. Much appreciated. Again, it's an honor. So like I said, I've listened to it for long enough that, holy cow, how the world turns. Now I'm on it.
Thanks for the support, mate. Cheers. Speak soon.